right, hello and welcome to today's webinar, Star Rating Reflections. I'm Cassie Azzo, Senior Product Marketing Director here at Cotiviti. Thank you so much for joining us today. Ashley McNary is an experienced Senior Product Director supporting our Star Intelligence solution, as well as clinical data acquisition services. Driven by her passion to see improvements in healthcare quality, Ashley takes pride in working with clients to improve their HEDIS, star rating, and retrieval initiatives, and enabling better care for their members. She has been with Cotiviti for over 10 years. And Marge Sansetta is the product manager for Cotiviti's Star Intelligence tool, which assists health plans to track, predict, and model CMS Star Ratings for improved quality. Marge ensures that Star Intelligence represents the voice of Cotiviti's customers and aligns with industry best practices. With over a decade of experience in quality and Medicare Advantage Star Ratings, Marge has a unique perspective on the challenges and opportunities facing health plans and providers today.
So first we'll focus on cut point changes, and then next we'll go into some average rates and ratings, take a look at the year-over-year changes in overall star ratings, and finally do a quick review of measure additions, removals, and weighting changes. So let's start by talking about cut points. So between 2023 and 2024, there were huge shifts in the cut points themselves. 25% of cut points went up, 22% went down. 25 went down, 22 stayed the same, and 52% of cut points went up. And of course, the biggest contributor to this change was the Tukey outlier deletion. So the purpose of the Tukey outlier methodology is to delete those outliers, those scores that are statistical anomalies compared to the rest of the scores before your cut points are set. So more outliers tend to occur at the bottom of the distribution, not the top. So in general, what we see is the cut points shifting up. Those low scores that were dragging down the grading curve for the measures were removed, thus increasing where the cut points themselves were set. So who were the movers and shakers this year? In the next few slides, I'll take you through some examples of specific measures where there were some big shifts in the cut points. Next slide, Ashley. Thank you. Okay, so first up, this is the TTY availability measure. What I'm showing you here is the cut point thresholds for 2, 3, 4, and 5 stars and how they changed over the last 5 years. A picture really is worth 1,000 words here, because take a look at the fluctuations in these cut points. The first thing that jumped out at me when I saw this chart was the narrowing of the range between the 2 and 5 star cut points. So in 2022, 58 points separated the highest and lowest cut point thresholds. So it was 32 for a 2 star and all the way up at 94 for a 5 star. But in 2024, the spread between that 2 and 5 star dropped to just 25 points. The spread was cut in half, with 72 for a 2 star and 97 for a 5 star. Think through that example with me for a moment. So a score of 59 would have given you a 3-star rating in 2023, but now gives you a rating of 1. That's a huge difference, right? There's so many changes in the cut points that plans need to track to that it can be a lot to keep up with. On the next slide, there is another example. This time we're looking at blood sugar control. Again, I'm showing you that change in cut point thresholds over the last 5 years, and we see the same narrowing of the field. So in 2022, there was a 40-point spread between a 2 and 5 star, and by 2024, that dropped to 29 points. So the thing that stood out to me on this chart was that all of the cut points continue to ratchet higher and higher. In the last 2 years, that 5-star threshold has increased by 6 points, and the 4-star threshold increased by 8 points. Those are not insignificant changes. When you look at the 2-star cut point trend, you might think to yourself, but I thought CMS put guardrails in place so that cut points wouldn't change too much. And you would be right. Back in 2023, star rating year 2023, CMS implemented those guardrails with the goal of limiting cut point movement to no more than 5%. But as you can see in this chart, some of the cut points moved way more than 5% between 2023 and 2024. So how did this happen? Around the end of last year, CMS published their Tukey simulation on their performance website to define what the cut points would have been in 2022 and 2023 had the Tukey outliers already been applied to those years. So when this year's cut points were set, CMS based those guardrails off the Tukey simulated cut points, not the actual published cut points. So in other words, cut points couldn't change by more than 5% from where they would have been if Tukey was already in place. There's been a lot of uproar around this, but at the end of the day, the cut points stand where they are and they will not be changing this year. So I think a lot of plans were caught off guard a bit by the amount of change that we saw here, and just the amount of change year over year. So I have one more example to share with you on the next slide. This time we're looking at COA pain assessment. And again, the range between the 5-star and the 2-star cut point was cut in half between 2022 and 23 and 24. What these three examples say to me is that the bar is getting ever higher, and that maintaining that same performance year over year just isn't going to cut it. CMS continues to ratchet that bar higher and higher, and it also highlights the need to track to predicted cut points. If you're simply tracking to CMS's published cut points, you can severely overestimate your star ratings. So it's important to track where the market is going, not where it's been. All right, so now let's switch gears and take a look at national averages. This chart shows the national average rates and ratings for the last few years. So despite them remaining fairly consistently, there were some large drops in the average star ratings due to those increases in cut points that we just talked about. So for example, the SUPD measure, statin use in persons with diabetes, the rate itself remained consistent around 85% year over year, but the national average star rating dropped from a 3.1 to a 2.7. In other words, on average, plans are achieving the same rate, but because the grading curve is getting harder, plans aren't maintaining the same rate by achieving the same rating by achieving the same rate. We see a similar example to this on the next slide. This time it's reviewing appeals decisions. So reviewing appeals decisions maintained a very consistent rate right around 95% year over year, but the national average star rating dropped from a 4.4 to a 3.6, so a drop of nearly a whole star. What stands out to me when I look at this chart is the need for that prospective view. STARS by its very nature is a very retrospective program. So in order to be successful, you need to have a clear focus on where it's going. The question is no longer just how am I doing, but how am I doing compared to the rest of the industry, and where is it going? Right around the corner, you'll all be setting goals for yourselves for next year. And when you set those goals, it's very important to take into consideration the performance of your biggest competitors in the industry at large, in addition to just looking at your own performance year over year. All right, so up until this point, we've focused on individual measures and cut points. We'll switch gears now and take a look at the overall star ratings that were assigned in 2024 at the contract level. So the purpose of this chart that you're seeing here is to look at the change in star ratings at the contract level between last year and this year. So looking at 23 versus 24, around 42% of plans stayed the same. You can see that nice bell curve shape, but it's a little lopsided. There's definitely more plans losing stars than they are gaining stars. So 37% of plans dropped at least a half of a star between 2023 and 2024. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide is looking at the number of plans in each star rating between 2022 and 2024. So within that bar, each one of the bars, you can see the colors represent the different star ratings that were assigned. So take a look at those three top colors on each of these bars. Dark blue is the 5-star, green is the 4.5 star, and green, the light blue is 4 stars. So in 2022, 68% of plans were rated 4 stars or above. But by 2024, only 42% of plans were rated 4-star above. So in other words, the number of plans achieving 4 stars or above dropped by 26% between 22 and 24. And the number of plans achieving 5 stars dropped by 10% between 22 and 24. This is a significant drop, and it reflects CMS's goal of meaningfully differentiating between plans with 3 stars, 4 stars, and 5 stars. If everyone's at that 5-star level, then the value of that 5-star is watered down. Only those true high achievers stand out in the marketplace when they achieve that 5-star rating. On that note, I'd like to take the opportunity to extend a big congratulations to Cotiviti's Quality and Stars clients. On average, they outperform the industry. 35% of all contracts submitted without Cotiviti received a star rating of 4 or above, while 56% of all contracts submitted with Cotiviti received a star rating of 4 or above. So hats off to Cotiviti for doing a great job in being, having great submissions and great customers. All right, so now let's take a look at that same chart, but this time we'll focus on the enrollment. Thank you. So on the previous chart, each plan was counted equally, no matter if it had 100 members or 1,000 members or 100,000 members. When you count each member within those plans, though, the chart becomes even more lopsided. So again, taking a look at that dark blue, the green, and the light blue, most of the enrollment in the plans is at the 4-star or above level. So to put some numbers around that, in 2022, 90% of members were in a plan rated 4 stars or above. But by 2024, only 72% of members were in that same threshold. In 2022, 27% of members were in 5-star plans. But by 2024, that dropped all the way down to 7%. So now let's overlay those last two slides, comparing the number of plans versus the enrollment in those plans. I think this really highlights the number. So when you overlay those two, you can get a good picture of how the bulk of enrollment is tied to plans with a star rating of 4 or above. So on this slide, the orange bars represents the number of plans at each star ratings, but the blue line represents the number of enrollees associated with each of those star ratings. So similar to previous years, we see that the bulk of members are enrolled in the 4-star plans or above. Those plans are continuing to attract the lion's share of membership. My biggest takeaway when I was looking at this slide, really comparing the plans to the enrollment, is that year-round marketing, higher quality bonus payments, and the ability to add those additional member services keep these plans extremely attractive to members. And so it's no wonder why so many enrollees go to these higher rated plans. They have better offerings, better pricing, and it can be hard to compete with. All right. Finally, I want to touch base on the measure weights and categories. So this graph demonstrates the sum of the measure weights for each measure within the given category. So for example, the pharmacy category contains the med adherence measures and SUPD. And while there's only a handful of measures, several of them are triple weighted, thus increasing their contribution towards the overall contract rating. So there's some big changes coming up to these measure categories, either through measure retirements and additions or shifts in each category's contribution. changes to the weights. So, for example, the CAPS measures dropped from 32% of the overall measure weighting down to just 20% by 2026. This was greatly in part to the reduction in the patient access and experience measures from a 4-weight to a 2-weight. Meanwhile, HEDIS measures represented just 13% of measures in 2023, but it's projected to be 25% of measures by 2026. So my takeaway here is to make sure that you're reviewing all of the upcoming changes to the Star Ratings program. You really can't afford to be caught off guard. You want to be doing things like tracking the display measures so you have an idea of your performance and goals for those measures before they become part of the program. Have a plan for how all of these measure changes can impact your overall Star rating in the upcoming years. So if you've invested heavily in those patient access and experience measures in lieu of some of the other areas, you might have to shift your focus a bit now that the measure weight is lower on those.
So are you ready for these changes, right? We just kind of deep dive into those 2024 Star Ratings. So now let's talk about what you need to be prepared on for this next year. So first of all, we have kidney health evaluation measure is being added to the program as a single weighted measure. This is replacing the diabetes nephropathy measure, which, as all of you should know, was retired here in the 2024 Star Ratings. Now, just looking at the 2023 display data, the average measure rate was 43% for this measure. Best guess is that, to get a 5-star next year, you probably are looking to be somewhere around a 62%, but we may see these increase as more plans probably will decide to focus on these newly rated measures. What we've seen from our experience is that display measures, typically aren't really a focus until they become a real rated measure. The next change is to the SUPD, so statin use in persons with diabetes, and then those medication adherence measures. So both of them are going to see changes to their continuous enrollment to be more in line with how PQA authored the measures. The impact here will probably be on your eligible population. The measures are going to look for enrollment during the full calendar year with only one gap in enrollment, not just members enrolled in a 30-day period. But yeah, so something to just kind of pay attention to coming into this next year. Now, probably one of the largest impacts is the shift of that colorectal cancer screening measure from a hybrid measure to being reported as ECDS only. Now, if you haven't been reviewing this already, first of all, hope you are, but if you haven't, probably one of the biggest things you could do is really dig into this measure and really understand where are your hits coming from for this measure. Is there a specific, maybe provider group or a certain source, and look at converting as much of this data into supplemental data that you can. I think that's probably one of the best things you could be doing right now to just help cover the gap that you might face in this measure. And, honestly, if I could gaze into my crystal ball with this measure, I do think we'll probably see a drop in the national average. Currently it's at 71% with a 3.6 average star rating. So this might be, one of the only cut point thresholds that might drop, in this next year. But don't hold me to it, because you never know. You never know what might happen, right? Now, the last change that Martin had already kind of mentioned was that shift in the weight of the CAPS and operation measures back down to 2x weight. This shift might be really good for some of the plans out there who, perform better in those clinical measures versus non-clinical measures. But this definitely kind of shifts that focus away from that patient experience and back to those, clinical, outcome preventative measures. I do welcome you to scan this QR code here on your screen to download our CMS Star Rating calendar. It is a good reminder to kind of have. I always save it on my desktop just to help remind me, what are proposed changes, what's been confirmed. So our calendar does have a summary of those updates from the 2023 Star Rating year through 2028. You can also find this calendar on our website as well. And if you need help building a strategy, Cotiviti does track and apply the CMS updates to measures and weights into our Star Intelligence solution. So it's a great solution to really help our clients get ahead of these anticipated changes. If you are interested in learning more, please just contact us at answers@cotiviti.com. All right, so our last section here for the webinar is just to share some of our recommendations on jumpstarting your program in the new year and how you can use your 2024 Star Ratings to better plan your resources on where to focus in this coming year. So the 3 recommendations I want to focus on today is benchmarking your results to highlight areas of opportunity, focusing on measures you can create meaningful impact on, and changing tactic to be more proactive. And a lot of what I'm going to say here is really expanding off a lot of what Marge already kind of said in the beginning of our webinar, with different insights and things to be thinking about as you go into this next year for Star Ratings. All right, starting with benchmarking, we feel it's really important that you take the time to look at your 2024 Star Ratings, looking at that 2022 calendar year results and comparing it to how are you doing today in 2023. So ask yourself, ask your team, zoom in on those measures that are lagging behind. Identify, is it a normal lag you see every year? Or is it something to be concerned about? How large of a variance is it? Is it more than a 10% variance where you might not be able to close the gap to get that rate back up? Now, once you identify these measures that might be lagging behind, order them based on the impact they may have. So we all know a triple weighted measure has a bigger impact than a single weighted measure, right? So try to, think about that sort of ordering. You might also want to order them based on the type of measure, preventative, pharmacy, chronic conditions, follow-up measures. Now, finally, you do want to look at those cut points from the 2024 Star Ratings and see how much they changed by. So as Marge mentioned earlier, there were some big swings, right, in these cut points. So look at every single measure and identify, did you lose a star due to the cut points increasing, not because your rate decreased? And then identify how much you might need to improve to get back that lost star. So for example, let's say that blood sugar control, so Mark earlier showed the graph of how those cut points changed this year. So let's say you're currently sitting at a 70%, and normally you end the year somewhere around 75%, and that's including some of your hybrid lift assumptions. Now, maybe this is not a measure you typically focus on in Q4. Your plan's performance has been pretty consistent year over year. However, due to the cut point changes, rather than receiving that 4-star you normally got, you received a 3-star this year. So now, instead of that 5% gain that you typically get, consistently you go from that 70 to 75%. So typically you get that 5% gain. Now you need to work harder to get a 10% gain so you can get the measure back to that 4-star threshold. All right, so the second one here is what measures will create that meaningful impact. So now that we've gathered all this information, we looked at what measures are lagging, we've kind of ordered them. Let's split the measures into 2 groups. So knowing we have, basically 2 months left of this year, which measures can you act on now to create meaningful change versus what measures would take longer to intervene? So I know that you probably have some algorithm in mind to sort, and order these measures. I know personally, you think about the preventative ones, you think about the ones that are more clinical, that are maybe easier to close those gaps. Probably not thinking so much about CAHPS measures at this moment, or my appeals, my call center, although call center, based on those cut point swings, might be something you want to try to look at here in the next 2 months. But once you've, listed out these measures, list out the measures that might have less than 5% of the population needed to close a gap to move to the next star. So typically we see this as an obtainable number for plans to act on. And then once you get this list of those measures, look to see, when you're looking at an individual measure and you're looking at all the members with a gap, look to see if those members have multiple gaps that can be closed in a single visit. So use a measure gap report, right, to review all the clinical measures, including those Part D adherence measures, to identify these members with the largest gaps, and then collaborate with your member engagement team, your care managers, to work to close those gaps first, right? So going back to that blood sugar control example, even though you might need a 10% increase to get back to that 4-star threshold, this may only be 5% of your population that has to close their gap to get there. And then I bet, using this measure, a chronic condition measure, I mean, already we know that there are other diabetes measures that are part, with the adherence, with the eye exam, kidney evaluation. So look at then these members and see, now, do they have multiple gaps that they need to close? So maybe focusing on that measure, focusing on that group of members might prove, overall, more beneficial to your overall rating. Now, another great way to identify what measures to focus on that could create the meaningful impact is to review your provider groups. Hopefully, you have provider reporting in place today that you can generate using the new cut points to determine which groups are falling behind their peers. Once you identify the lower performing groups, which ones have the most assigned members? How can you leverage these groups to help close more gaps to improve the clinical measures of focus? Try to highlight just a couple of measures for these groups to focus on. Let's be realistic. There's 2 months left of the year. They won't be able to tackle all of them. So again, going back to how we sorted the measures, which ones are going to be a bigger impact to your plan, maybe those are the ones that you really want to talk to your provider groups in tackling now and trying to close those gaps. The last recommendation that I can't stress enough, Marge mentioned this multiple times in the beginning too, is that you need to be more proactive. You need to start planning for next year, now, right? And this may seem obvious to a lot of you, but surprisingly, most plans out there are still being too retroactive rather than proactive. So first, probably one of the most important things you could be doing is performing those monthly data runs to evaluate your HEDIS measures, your Part D measures, be able to track them month over month, year over year. So if you're not doing this today, get off this webinar right now, go talk to your HEDIS vendor, right? Do this now. Now is the time. And start getting the data prepared. So what we have seen is that getting the data prepared is the largest hurdle that plans may face in moving to being more proactive. We've seen it time and time again that we might have a client who's like, yes, I want to start doing proactive runs in the next calendar year. All of a sudden it is June and we're starting proactive runs. Or maybe even later, it's September and we're starting proactive runs. No, you really need to be starting, in the new year. I recommend at least by March, you are starting to get some claims trickling in. You start doing those proactive runs. It's also a good time if you're waiting too late, then you're also not able to work some of those measures like an OMW measure that has that weird time frame from July to June. So if you're not doing your proactive runs until July, you already are too late to work that measure. So you really need to be, starting at least in March, get what claims you can from the new year, carry over your claims from the prior year, carry over any of your supplemental data, start looking at what your measures are doing right away in the new year. And I know it is so hard to do that when HEDIS season, and probably a lot of you are like, I'm also in charge of the HEDIS submission. So that's really hard to do. But if you can spend just, a little bit of time each week looking at your proactive runs, it's going to go, it's going to really help you in the end. Now, I think another thing that's really smart to be doing right now is just assessing what else you're doing for stars and if it's working, right? I'm sure there's a lot of programs in place at your health plan today, and it's really important that you take a fine-tooth comb and really understand, are these programs driving the desired results that you are expecting? And you might have had these programs in place for years and you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know. Do we want to get rid of them? Do we not? it's probably better to just, cut them off now if you're not seeing the results. I mean, we just saw how many plans, lost the 5-star rating, the 4.5-star rating, the 4-star rating. So it is really important that you're working with vendors and groups within your health plan, people that are being really good partners to helping you meet your desired star rating results. Now, the next thing, of course, is just setting goals and setting your goals now. As I've been saying this whole time, Marge said, do that deep dive in your 2024 star rating results, benchmark it to your current progress, and now really look at what measures should you focus on for next year and set attainable goals. So really what I mean by this is don't expect to jump from that 3-star to the 5-star in 1 year. I mean, with that spread of cut points too. I mean, it's not really, I wouldn't say it's obtainable to go, a full 10% jump in 1 year, right? But try to set your goals somewhere in the middle, right? So try to maybe be at that, 5% increase, 3%, 4% increase. And don't be shy in checking out your competition. I mean, it's out there, it's publicly available. That's how we were able to get all that information for those awesome graphs. So go out, look what they received. If they got a higher star rating than you, maybe use their rate as your next year goal. Because, I think what we're really going to see, and as, Marge showed earlier with the enrollment, what we're really going to see is here, open enrollment right around the corner. I think you're going to see a lot of these Medicare Advantage members leaving their current plan, right? If that plan received a lower rating and going again to these higher rated plans. So if you don't know what your competition's doing, that's really puts you at a disadvantage. Now, lastly, it's really important that you are tracking these new measures and these measure changes. I mean, this year, we didn't really talk about it up front, but there are 3 new measures added to the program this year, right? So TRC, FMC, PCR is back. That wasn't really the big headline for the star ratings, right? It really was the cut point changes. But normally new measures, they do kind of wreak havoc a little bit on the big math problem that is star ratings. And so when you have 3 new measures, and even though they were all single weighted this year, they can create some distractions from, your overall program and what you're trying to do. So what I really recommend here is just find a scenario modeler type tool, try to understand what is the impact, with all of these changes. So like I said, with KED coming into the plan, into the program, with caps and admin measures changing back down to a 2x weight instead of 4, maybe your plan was really being carried by the caps and, admin measures. And some plans out there were really being carried by those measures, received a higher rating because they did so well there. Well, when those measures now take up a smaller piece of that pie, yeah, you're going to see some big changes. Now, even just the addition of a single measure, what is that impact? So really take a look at all of these changes. Like I said, use some sort of scenario modeler to really understand, what measures do you need to focus on to improve to then just, help make up that difference. And I also recommend, with the new measures, going back and looking at the display data and trying to really understand where did your measure fall compared to other plans in your area. So again, looking at your, competition and understanding, do you have an opportunity to improve in that measure? So right now, there is only the 2023 display data available on the CMS website. They usually post display data sometime in the beginning of the year. I think this last year it was like around January. So when that comes out, that's a great time to then, go in, look at that KED measure and really understand, what do you need to do to improve that measure? I would also be looking at what are the display measures that CMS is proposing adding to the program. So they initially were going to add those 3 Part D measures. It was proposed to be added for this next year, so that did not get finalized. However, you probably should start looking at them now. If they are proposed to be added, most likely CMS is going to add them. We don't know for what star rating year yet, But if you have an opportunity to review those measures and start looking at those gaps, working with maybe your PBM to try to close those gaps, you're just going to be better in the end. So in summary, now is just a great time to reflect on your past performance in the 2024 Star Ratings, closely monitor your current performance with the 2025 Star Ratings, and then plan for that future performance in your 2026 Star Ratings. Star Ratings, as I just said, it's a 3-year thing, right? You really need to be understanding, what was your past performance, your current performance, your future performance. And, you really need to be using all the historical data, all of this competitor data to help guide you to understand, where you need to be focusing your attention, what measures are going to make the most meaningful impact to your future Star Rating performance.